Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
So, John, you've been a CRO multiple times, and now you're investing, sitting on boards, advising companies, and you're helping them to recruit, whether it's sales leaders or CROs. And when we recruit, we've always talked a lot on this podcast about recruiting for characteristics. So there's skills, there's knowledge, there's a track record, and then there's characteristics. And one of the big characteristics you look for in sales leaders is EQ, emotional quotient. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And maybe this goes back to kind of my original love of enterprise selling and how everyone, I think, in an organization, whether it's a CRO, whether it's a CEO, or great salespeople, especially in enterprise selling, have to really be able to read the room, and it comes in a special play if you take seriously that a big part of every sales cycle, every interaction as a leader, has everything to do about understanding personal and professional wins as it does about what you're up to. And so that impacts, and I'm sure we'll talk about many things here, but it impacts leadership, impacts your effectiveness with getting folks to do the things that you think are the right things to do in terms of influencing versus telling. But I mean, that at the base form, it's really a pet peeve of mine right now. And I have a thesis that especially and this will be one of the many times that I know you guys never find yourself doing this, but my kids always talk to me about being a boomer and okay, boomer, quit talking that way. But I do think as a parent, but as now seeing across multiple companies that there is there's a blind spot or a lack of interest. And I think it has to do with how young folks have grown up avoiding to some degree personal interaction and leaning on digital interactions, which are all critical and important. And I have to evolve better at digital transactions or digital interactions over time. But I don't think we can get away from being extraordinarily effective at constantly and consistently understanding how we're doing, how we know, and what the wins are on the other side of the table. So so for me, it drives me, and maybe this is for a few, it drives me nuts in interviews and sales calls when folks show up and they're so used to taking notes on laptops that they show up to a meeting and they have nothing to take notes. And for me, it's all about active listening, which is also a big part of reading the room. It is about showing, and John, you do a great job in this podcast, by the way, of not just active listening, which you're always great at, but you constantly take notes, comments, things down and bring it back in the discussion later on, which is exactly what high-level enterprise sales folks do. And so it really bugs me because I think it's a critical skill that we have to continue to work on. And so, we'll talk about a couple things, but during the interview process, I always like to ask many questions, but one of the many questions towards the end of an interview is, how are you doing?
Oh, I love that question. I love that. How do you think you're doing, right? Yeah.
But the next question is even more important. How do you know?
Yes.
And because they'll answer that question always, how are you doing? And then, and so, for me, trying to understand how they think about constantly how other people are viewing what they're saying, not focused on what they're saying. And there's so many tips and tricks and and things to think about. But in the interview process, I always used, I don't know how you guys feel about this. I used to not really enjoy group interviews. And I think it was, for me, it was because as I always view myself as a seller, even in interviews. And for me, I want to control the questioning, the pace of the interview. And oftentimes a group interview, you won't get that at all. And unless you really have great prep and roles and responsibilities, it doesn't happen. But one thing that I have started to find is really effective for high-level enterprise selling in particular is put a CRO or a great salesperson in a room with a group interview of 3 folks. And the only goal is to figure out if that person can assess during that meeting what's important to each of those people in the room versus how they're selling their own capabilities. And I think it's just a great sign. And I'm on the other end of that, no matter what the meeting is, whether I'm meeting with CEOs, whether we're trying to sell a company to someone else. It's like when someone jumps on and we don't stop and do some level of discovery about what's important on the other side without avoiding. And then it's all about adjusting your message to the right people and the right level over time. And so the question for you is, the open-ended question is, can you judge it well? And then are you willing and can you train and develop those skills over time? What do you guys think?
Well, let's talk about first the importance of it, why it's so important, and then we can talk about like how you can discover it. So first of all, you said, you have to be able to read the room. One of the things that I liked to do when I went on a sales call is, let's say you walk into a conference room and there's 8 people in the room. I'd like to walk around, shake everyone's hands, look them in the eye, and kind of guess with my gut, is this person here only because someone told them to be here? Are they the potential economic buyer? Are they the champion? Are they the enemy? What role are they playing in this room? And then throughout the process of the meeting, trying to solidify whether my initial gut was right and what roles and responsibilities these people had in the room, right? Trying to read the political landscape. And that's so important, as you pointed out, not only to make the sale, but also when you're dealing with, as a leader, when you're dealing with your people. And what I found, John, is that people are and I've said this before on the podcast, people are in a constant state of partial attention because there's so many distractions today. And to have EQ, you first have to be here. You have to be here and in the moment with no other distractions. And then only when you're here and in the moment can you actually listen effectively. And then only if you're here in the moment and listening effectively with no distractions, only then can you truly use your intuition. And a lot of EQ, I think, comes from the fact that people are not really here in the moment, not really listening. So there's no way to turn that intuition on and have EQ.
Well, I totally agree. And I think one of the underlying foundations for that is fewer and fewer in-person meetings, regardless of how, and the value of in-person meetings, and when those meetings happen, make sure, more than ever, it's always been critical for us to try to get the right people in the room for meetings. But those distractions on digital sales interactions are terrible, and I'm bad at it as well, especially in group sessions. If it's one-on-one, right, it can be a little more effective, but group sessions, right, and when you sit in face-to-face. And so I think another thing in a critical sales cycle is when and how do you push to invest in face-to-face meetings, and what can you hope to get out of it? But I think early in a sales process, if it's a real process, if it's a qualified process, that getting there to start, because all the foundation of many of the things that I think you guys spend a lot of time talking about, developing champions, access to the EB and how you get access to the EB. More importantly, how do you talk to the EB and what's important to the EB? All those things are much easier and way more effective in person over time. Mm-hmm. but I don't think we live in the world where we're going to have a majority of face-to-face interactions anytime in the near term. And so how do we figure out where and how we inject those meetings and what we're trying to accomplish? And then last but not least, having the darn skills and preparation to really focus on that. And it's, for me, that the political environment and the personal wins. And the personal wins can be personal to the individual or personal to their reputation inside or what they're trying to accomplish in the company or their career, all the above. But I think what I see, it's a big gap that, especially
at the risk of being three dudes in their 60s having a conversation. No, it's a serious point for me. Because I get approached on this topic a lot, and I think it's really critical topic. I think the discussion is fantastic we're having. First of all, I think we should probably, for our listeners, we'll go back and kind of give a definition of EQ, but then also, any great individual, the art of communication is about outcomes. And so when we're addressing outcomes like understanding, knowing people in the room, understanding where the power and influence is, understanding what people care about, leaning into another based upon the way they communicate, you have to adjust your communication. These are all outcomes. I think the how of these outcomes have dramatically changed over the years in modality, in communication differences. And what's also happening is I watch this is the buyers are changing. The level of, this topic is not just a seller topic, it's a buyer topic. And so for me, it's always about matching. And I think it's important to talk about outcomes, because what happens sometimes, I think we lose not the revenue builders audience, we just lose the audience sometimes when we make a projection about a mode of communication. And I'm in complete agreement with everything that was said here. I struggle with the in-person versus the Zoom meetings. But the big point for me is that the world has to find a way to get the same outcomes. And I think the old principles of leaning in, making it less about you and more about, those are Egypt old. How do you make it more about the individual in front of you, an outside-in approach versus an inside-out approach? Those basic principles and adjusting and being adaptable to what's in front of you, those are never going to change. When we're long gone, those principles are never going to change. It's the how of those and the modality, I think, that we're all being challenged with. That's my opinion.
And when you say modality, John, you're talking about the form of communication?
Yeah, I'm talking about the environment of communication. I'm talking about, sales calls today. Just look at enterprise sales. How many enterprise sales we say, a group environment or non-group environment, almost every single enterprise sales I can think of is multi-threaded now. It's multi-threaded. There are multiple champions. There are multiple coaches. There are multiple. And so the very nature of having to be, amongst more people and probably having meetings with more people and people, there are some people that are, used to that. And there are some people that are not so used to that. But the reality of the time today, I think, is that going and establishing relationships with one individual inside of an account, you could do that great. You could have an unbelievable champion, and you're at massive risk on most enterprise sales today, even at the economic buyer level, with collaborative decisions and the impact of software. So it's a bigger conversation. If you don't mind, I will comment on this, but I'd also like you guys to give a definition of what you're calling EQ today, just so we can level set folks. So that was a lot of words.
You want to go, John, or you want me to?
Sure was. For me, I think it's a combination of self-awareness, knowing who you are, trying to read through your intuition and your listening and questioning who the other person is. So what your social style is, what their social style is, and how to effectively communicate with that person using, being here in the moment, using your listening skills, questioning skills, and your intuition. But if you don't know who you are and you can't really, and you don't understand your social style and don't understand the other person's social style, it makes it very difficult to effectively communicate with that person.
I like that. Johnny, how about you? What do you feel on EQ?
Yeah, I think for me, if I were to get down to the basic sense, it's self-awareness. It's having, we all think we're cooler than we are, by the way, but having having the gap between how you view yourself and how other people view you as narrow as possible. So that's that knowing yourself that John's talking about for sure. And then the high level skill of looking into the soul and the communication style of people across the table and have genuine interest to understand what's important to them and why. And that goes back to the authentic curiosity stuff. But in general, I think that for me is self-awareness. And to John's point, I think it happens in calls as well, where how you communicate with important people on the other side and their level of understanding. It happens a lot between technical and business issues and all the gray areas between. But great salespeople are able to navigate and move and let other people help in areas that they're not great in. But whatever you do, talk at the level of the audience in general, I think is super important.
I like that. So I'm a big believer in, and I think it's very difficult today under all those circumstances that we talked about earlier, the challenges, the barriers to really doing that well in society, I think is a challenge for anybody. It's even for 60-year-olds talking to, 30-year-olds or 20-year-olds, whatever. It's that gap it goes kind of both ways. But for me, it's kind of like heart and head, in the simplest terms. First, it's, you can't really figure anybody else out if you can't figure yourself out. So if you don't understand how you communicate, why you communicate the way you do, things as simple as triggers in a conversation, or the way that you listen, or the way that you struggle to listen. So I agree with Johnny Mac on the importance of really knowing yourself first. And then I think there's this human behavior, a need to understand, to get past somebody's concern and get to an interest. This is Egypt old. I think no matter what decades we're talking in, that has been as old as Egypt. Somebody's ability to get beyond somebody's concern and get to their underlying interest, which they may or may not have communicated, is the epitome for me of EQ. And that's Egypt old. That's not just this generation, past generations, future generations. So that is a tremendous skill to be able to do that. And then it's the path that you choose to communicate. And I think the best people that I see, regardless of age, are the ones that create space for another individual to take that comfortable leap from concern to interest, to I have a little problem, it's not really a problem, to it's a major problem, to it's such a big problem. The negative consequences are so huge that the impact to our company is X, Y, or Z. Those outcomes are as old as Egypt. The way that an individual, and everybody has to get to those outcomes. The way that you get to those outcomes, I think, is the topic of the day, of helping people understand, especially people of this generation, how much more difficult that is, because people don't find themselves in those conversations a lot under digital media. You're less likely to do that in a digital environment. to go from your concern to your interest, because it takes trust. For me to go to that level, it takes trust. And the farther away you move from a four eyes conversation, in my opinion, the harder that trust is to build, but you still got to build it. So how do you build it? That's the big, I think those are the questions of the day.
Well, let's build on what we're saying. So we're saying that someone has to be here. They have to listen.
Mentally, you're talking about. You're talking about
What's
mentally.
that?
You're talking about mentally be here, not just face to face, right?
Yeah, I'm just building on what we said. You have to be here. You have to listen effectively. You have to use your intuition. As Johnny pointed out, you need self-awareness. Then he also pointed out something else. You need authentic curiosity, which we ought to talk about. And only if you do those things and have those capabilities can you actually be in the customer conversation. Otherwise, you're somewhere else. Like if you're not prepared, if you're not really listening, if you're not using your intuition, you're having a conversation, but you're not in the conversation. You're not deep in that conversation. Because if you're deep in that conversation, I don't really then at that moment have to think about what I'm going to say. It just comes naturally to me based upon what the customer said. I'm in this conversation. I'm working with this customer. I got this stuff figured out. But without the prerequisites of what I just talked about, it's really difficult to be in the customer conversation. So one of the things that Johnny pointed out was, well, we got three Johns here. John True pointed out was authentic curiosity. We ought to talk about that for a minute. John, talk to us a little bit about what you mean by that.
I give examples of this. One person that I think from a sales standpoint was one of the best ever that you guys work with closely is Gary at authentic curiosity. And it, I think it comes down to, really sincerely wanting to understand the other side, whether it's their environment, whether it's their problems, whether it's what they're up to. You got to get enjoyment. I do believe this. You can't fake it. You got to really get enjoyment out of sincerely going through what's important on the other side. And so, for me, in my world as an investor, man, one of the reasons I enjoy it so much is I get a chance to authentically investigate all kinds of different things that are super important to people, whether it's new spaces, whether it's the motivations behind CEOs, and it is for me. John Kaplan, I hear you talk about giving energy. That gives me energy, learning new things and new spaces. And, one of the reasons that in vulnerable fashion, one of the reasons I moved here is that I started to get a little bored as a CRO, and that was a death knell. I knew as soon as that started to happen that it wasn't giving me energy at the time, John. And I loved investigating, dissecting, looking at the forensics of businesses or spaces. And that was my authentic curiosity, my current role, which I hope makes me more effective there. But I guess that's what I'm talking about in authentic curiosity, John. If
your brain's kind of wired that way, if I recall, right? Are you an engineer?
He's more analytical. John.
Yeah, you're I remember you being very analytical when we sold together.
I studied, well, yes, engineer, computer science.
Yeah.
And my lovely father, who bless his soul, passed away, would always remind me that he never saw a line of code that I wrote for his investment in computer science.
Yeah. But going back to authentic curiosity, you pointed out Gary, who was amazing. And, the best person I ever saw was this guy named Carlo Carpinelli. He was so authentic and so curious, but to do that, similar to Ann, there's two things that you had to have. One, you had to be very, very secure in yourself, and you had to be a very good listener. And then not offended when someone attacked you, or you felt like you were attacked, or your product was attacked. Both of those people that we just pointed out, very secure in themselves, very comfortable if the customer attacks their product, And they're so curious, they ask, but why? Why do you think that? How come you think that? They're just that curious. They're not trying to fight the customer's viewpoint because they're secure in themselves. They're just trying to truly understand. That's true curiosity.
I have another theory on this too, is you brought it back, John, when you talked about preparedness. And this is really good for this generation that we started off talking about, the current generation of sellers. I find that when you are prepared, I just bring it back to my athletic days. When I didn't have to think about the play, when I knew the play so well, when I knew the motion so well, the game was actually very slow for me. I knew I was a very, very good athlete when the game slowed down. And the only way to get the game to slow down is if I'm very prepared and aware of the direction I'm going in. And I suspect that Carlo and Gary, they know what they have to, they know where the point of this meeting. And they're allowed to do it because they listen so well and they move a conversation along so well that people, everybody likes to be led, provided you can take me to a place I can't get to on my own. So these people that we're talking about are more successful in these conversations because they're going somewhere. Like somebody understands that you're going somewhere. But the big point, and you're going to get to an outcome, the big point I want to make is for people listening, you have to dig into the science of the processes that are being taught today because they're complex sales. Once you understand the science so well, and you know the outcome of the science of the process, is where you get to bring this art of the heart of selling, the human behavior part of selling. And it can be a blast because it gets really, really slow. Like in your mind, I can be here and listen. I can let this customer talk because I know that we're getting to a point that he or she's going to reveal to me a problem so big that it has urgency. And I know where I'm going in the conversation. So that's my little play for science and art. And I do find a generation of people that don't want to be micromanaged. They think that the science of playbook and that gets talked about is a little bit sometimes intense, micromanaging. I would just encourage everybody, once you learn the science, the art is just a beautiful, it's just a beautiful thread. And I really see that comes from preparation. Johnny, you talk about being in the conversation. My hypothesis is the way that you do that is you know exactly where you are in the conversation. You know where the conversation's going. You know what the potential of the conversation is. Therefore, it's easier to slow down, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think there's also an element, I don't know if I'm going to find the right word as I describe this, but there's an element of selflessness in that conversation. You're not thinking all the time about me and my product. You're trying to actually be in that customer conversation with your EQ and everything we just described, and being selfless and trying to understand the customer and their environment. You don't have this constant urge to just throw features and functions and product and me at the customer. It's okay to sit back and say, I've really got to know more about this customer and their environment. There's a selflessness about it.
We talk about that, Johnny. We've heard that on numerous podcasts, one way or the other. It's the difference between somebody who is trying to be interested versus interesting. And when I first heard that, I was like, wow, that's pretty good. And I'm not sure I really understood what it meant. And then I think about it, and it's like, if you're a seller, you know exactly what this means. Are you sitting on the edge of your seat to try to make an interesting point or to be interesting in a conversation, or are you leaning forward to try to be interested on what somebody else is communicating?
Well, that's John's point on authentic curiosity. That's his main
human
point.
Communication, human behavior.
So maybe take this the same thread, but a different color. How about the impact of these skills in terms of authentic leadership and sales leadership in particular? Where does it show up? How do you figure out whether someone is great at it as a leader, and then what are the potential impacts if you are great at it? And for me, where I've been really poor over time. So, what do you guys think?
For me, I think
this goes also back to what you're saying of. So we talked about the importance of it, and now you're kind of getting to how do you know if somebody has this, whether you're doing an interview or it's one of your current leaders, right? That's your question, John.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Just want to make sure we're grounding everyone.
Cool.
I think there's human behavior here again. There's a basic human, we look at the studies. Let's just look at what the data says about people that are being led or being sold to or what have you. There's two major concerns that people in that communication path have. First one is they don't believe that people really understand them or understand their problem or understand their business. They've been studying that. That's 50 years old. That's 5 decades of data. And they also don't believe that people listen very well. So that we call that the seller deficit disorder at Force Management. And just knowing that that is what you're coming into. Every conversation, every interaction with somebody, you have to kind of overcome this deficit. And what I see great leaders do is they go back to knowing when this has been painful for them. And I remember being an athlete and actually saying to myself, and I can't use the words I use, but I would say, you don't effing know me. When somebody would try to make a statement to me or put a blanket to me, put a feature on top of me, put a characterization on top of me, it's a human basic nature to say, you don't effing know me. And maybe people don't say it so violently as I did in the past, but what I think you take into leadership is your goal is to know somebody. You can't lead somebody, in my opinion, you can't lead somebody without knowing them. And you can't know somebody with the stuff that we've been talking about where you don't know yourself first. When you're very, very comfortable in your own skin, it's so much easier to go find the skin of another individual. But on basic like leadership, if you can, and you can spot it. I've spotted it on other leaders. Tell me about, what do you know about that person? They'll tell me about their territory. They'll tell me about and I'll say, yeah, well, what else do you know about them? How'd they grow up? And that, again, that's Egypt old. And the people that aren't in their natural resting place of finding out another individual's story and create space for that, they struggle in leadership. That's my hypothesis. It's always been. And there's some people that are just very uncomfortable because I don't want to talk about your childhood because my childhood freaking sucked or whatever. They're very uncomfortable. They're not comfortable in their own skin. And I'm not being trivial about that. That's a really big thing. It's a big responsibility to lead.
Totally. And I think we'll go back to just because we have a common experience at PTC, but before we go there, looking for leaders, especially great salespeople, to be leaders. They to really assess whether they had an authentic, genuine interest in helping other people succeed. I mean, I know Brian Halligan talks a lot about the I and team and company people, and that he always wanted to find the company people, which is, I think, is really important, especially from a CEO perspective, because CEO is trying to deliver a shared vision that everyone gets behind first and foremost. At the individual manager level, I think the way they make decisions has to be about the company, but the way they manage starts from a foundation. Back to this authentic, but general authentic kind of interest in helping people be successful in whatever their terms of success are, and those things. That's another area where things have changed quite dramatically. I mean, we used to always be able to put, especially in sales organizations, put it in a bucket of making money or progressing their career in whatever way they define progressing their career. And now, man, there are many more active personal wins in that area, right? They want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. They want to oftentimes they want to work on an initiative that has the potential of changing either industries or the world, and understanding the why is really important. But I always look for those salespeople. I mean, the common trope is not all great salespeople make great leaders, which is important. But really looked for the folks even early when they were successful salespeople, who were the ones that embraced helping other people in development, didn't have to be asked to do that in training and development, because they got, as you say, energy, but they got true enjoyment and passion out of helping other people succeed. And then the second thing, which goes back to our comment about self-awareness, I think is a vulnerability. And I would say I was really poor at this. I think we were poor at this at PTC early. Is having a sincere interest in how you are being viewed by the people that you are leading. And so you're the best, John, at simple tropes. I wish you could write a book on your analogies and simple tropes. But for me, one of the simple tricks that I've started to do across anybody that I work with is, on a regular basis, what do you like most about working with me? And most importantly, what do you not like about working with me? And on a regular basis, being vulnerable to get, I mean, you can think about it in HR terms as 360 feedback. This is much more personal. This is much more our work styles. And I think as leaders, we could talk over that. And I would say at PTC early, one of our big blind spots, I thought, was projecting a general interest in other people's interests. And we went through, I would say, stages of, John, I remember you were a big part of this. We went through stages of, holy moly, we got a problem. We got a turnover problem. And, I remember I characterized that in two ways. One, we had a turnover problem because we weren't connected with our people. And when pardon my French, when shit gets real, when things don't go well, that's when you lose the people you're not connected with. They're the highest risk. And I remember we went through, there was almost a super rotation to who of our leaders, especially the first line, know their people. Right. And it was a great step. I think that has to go from bottom to top in an organization. And that's one of the things that great CROs and CEOs drive consistently, because if we're asking something of our leaders to do that isn't a practice throughout the organization, it's really not going to be effective over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, you were talking about a time when if we lost reps, we would just say, oh, he wasn't any good, just make an excuse. And yet we had to hold people accountable to the fact that, did you hire this person? Yes. Were you responsible for training, coaching, and leading this person? Yes. Okay. Then you need to look in the mirror and decide which one of those you did not do, and hold yourself accountable. And we had to turn the tables from, oh, we just hired some bad sales rep, to, no, you as the leader, you're responsible for it. And then once we turned the table, that's when the attrition went down. But going back to trying to discover it in a meeting or in an interview, I think first and foremost for me, if the candidate comes prepared, that already tells me a little bit about their authentic curiosity. If they don't come prepared, authentic curiosity, we don't have to really talk much about it. And then how effective are they at listening? And you can typically tell by if they're listening to what you're saying, the question they ask is not a superficial response. The question they ask is almost like a second or third level down. And then I think, wow, this person not only hears what I'm saying, but they're extrapolating down to, what effect that might have on them or the organization or how we sell or the sales process. The other thing I used to like to do is in the beginning, ask them like, why are you here? What is it that you personally want? And then later on in the interview, I'd ask them, well, tell me what drives you, what motivates you. And it would be conflicting information between what they said they wanted and then what was driving them and motivating them. And then you might say, and maybe let's say at the time we were a startup that was like doing 50 million. And then you say, well, what other companies are you talking to? And they'd say Salesforce.com, Oracle, IBM. And you think this person has no idea who they really are, what they really want, and what's motivating them. Why are they here at this $50 million company if they're talking to these three big companies? So there's a number of ways to start to assess their self-awareness, what really drives them, their authentic curiosity, all of that stuff, which we can ball up into EQ if you want.
That's a lot of time on one topic here, boys.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it, right? It's something that everyone struggles with.
And you guys are talking about authentic leadership too. We started the conversation on authentic leadership. I think a big test is this, and I call it the Wana factor. Want to, but I call it Wana. Is like I test for the Wana factor versus the have to factor. And there are leaders that need title, that need responsibility, that need the authority. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Authority to get something done, to get their people to do something, to get something done in an organization. And I look for people that have the ability to get people to want to do things that they don't want to do. But they do it anyways, like in its simplest form. How do you get people to do things that they might not necessarily want to do, but they do it anyways? And I also look for leaders that have a history of building teams that look more like Patriots than Mercenaries. And the difference for me is that some people can build a team by, banging the company to get the best comp plans, to get the best territories, to get the best resources. And there's those leaders that get the best for their teams. And they're known for being very kind of leaning towards their team, and they're all about their team, which is important. But sometimes they build a team of mercenaries. And I saw it at PTC. The minute the stock price, the first time the stock price after 10 years of 43 straight quarters of never missing the number to Wall Street, this was highlighted for me in my life bigger than anything else, is that you either had Patriots around you, you had mercenaries. What do the mercenaries do? They pick up their crap, they pick up their duffel bag, they leave. They just leave. And the Patriots, they freaking go home and they break down their furniture and they use the metal to make more bullets. And I know I'm kind of being facetious about that, but I find out, can you lead? Are you more of can you lead in a patriotic way, or do you lead in a mercenary way?
Well, I think that's also the culture too. So I'm going to counter that and say that when you build a culture of a bunch of mercenaries and a bunch of mercurial type people, and because you built that culture and they're only there for the money, and then the minute that stock price leaves, because that's what you built, see you later. So it's not just the person, it's also the culture that was built. What's that?
Look at the last 2 years. It's exactly what you're saying, John. The last 2 years and what's happened in technology and how many times, the equity in a company, and whether the VC, Johnny True, what you do with them, either the money's available or it's not available. We're either, justifying sales productivity, or we're funding growth at the expense of profitability. And you look at some of these environments and they are totally at risk for that concept. It's either built on one form or the other. And last 2 or 3 years, I think, was really, really difficult for companies that built it on, going towards an IPO or going towards an exit or going towards, and if it was based on kind of like that mercenary culture, they just evaporate.
Well, this goes back to Johnny's point of authentic or intimate, sales leadership. So you either are a transactional leader where, I ask you to do things and you do things to make money and not get punished. That's very transactional. And in that type of environment, the minute things go wrong, people can leave. Then there's a different way of saying authentic, intimate sales leadership. To me, it's transformational. If you understand and assess me and understand where I'm weak in my strength, in my skills, in my knowledge. And you helped me get to a place where I didn't think I could get on my own. And you've helped transform me. When we have a bad quarter, I'm not leaving because I'm attached to you as the manager. And where am I going to go where somebody's going to know me so well that and constantly helping me get to a place where I couldn't get on my own? I'm not leaving, but I'm leaving. It's a transactional management. I'm gone. See you later.
Yeah. Such a good point. I spend so much time with people that call me and looking for new opportunities, and I'm trying to understand why and what they're either running from or running to. And I got to tell you, like, people, we talk about this a lot on this podcast. People typically don't leave organizations, they leave people. And when they're analyzing an opportunity, I think they massively underestimate the impact of people on the next opportunity. Like, what did I like most about the leadership that I got in the last company? Or where do I thrive in the best type of leadership? And where do I really lose my energy in the worst type of leadership? And people really I don't think, are honest with themselves when they look at the next opportunity. And I see people get into the same over and over again, because leadership's, great leadership, it's rare. It's really rare. And if you're not honest with yourself, you can wind up in the exact same spot with, not being sure about why you're really going to another opportunity. So if you're analyzing an opportunity right now and you are not, one of your buckets is not, what am I going to learn? What am I going to experience from this leadership team? I think you're doing yourself a disservice. That's a blinder.
Hard to argue with that.
You see it all the time, though. You see people call me all the time. I need some coaching on my next gig. Okay, let me listen. Okay, so they tell me about, let's say, just 2 deals. One deal, the company's really going nowhere. They actually describe it that way, that this company's going nowhere, but I get a big title. The other one is a huge opportunity. It's a much smaller title, but the company's on fire. It's growing all the time. So I say to them, look, what I think you need to do is go take the smaller title with the bigger opportunity instead of taking the position. So people are always confusing position with opportunity. And what do you think they do when I hang up the phone? I find out that they took the position. 2 years later, they call me back and they tell me I was right. I'm going, I don't need to be right. I was trying to help you. And if they would have, and the company went nowhere, but they had a big title. If they would have went to the opportunity, they would have wind up with that title in 2 years later. They would have made a lot more money, been around a much better network of people that would transform them. They'd be transformed on their own by growing to different levels in the organization. But a lot of times people are they don't really understand themselves and they're just title hungry.
Yeah. That your last point, and I think we benefit from this, but I think especially earlier in your career, it's harder to understand the long-term circular impact of being around great people and a great network. And then it also, where it does get a bit transactional is that as you grow in your career, if you are interested in the top job, unfortunately, it's a truism, but investors and great CEOs really put value in the fact that you've seen what great looks like from their perspective, which means you've been around great success stories. And oftentimes you can be successful and make money by not being a part of those. But I think you lose. I mean, I get so much enjoyment today out of, I had the good fortune, and it's all very luck, of being involved in my operating stuff. 5 companies that all happened to be market leaders at their time in their industries. And one that was very lucky because they tend to get an unfair amount of equity value over time. But most importantly, what I didn't understand until later was those are the companies that recruit the best long-term potential people, and they create a network of folks that you can help and they can help you in ways that you can never predict in the future, but is tremendous long-term value to you and your career. And I think that that goes with the people that you spoke about, John, in terms of the leaders you're evaluating, but also the value and your ability to try to assess. And you can do it in numbers oftentimes in what is happening, how fast they're rolling, or whether they're truly in a unique spot. But in general, start as you move up in your career in sales management, putting an investor hat on and being able to understand what are my chances of being involved in an industry or market leading firm in this company. And then is the culture, as you mentioned, kind of consistent with the way I like to work. But I mean, that's been something that I've enjoyed for a long time, and I'm not sure it's there's some analytics to figuring out the great ones, but also a lot of good fortune. But understanding that getting involved in those companies, regardless of what level. I mean, you mentioned the title hunting thing. I mean, I see that a lot when people are looking for their first VP of sales or CRO job, and they're very willing to go take their first, where they're not executing someone else's plan, but they're having to create their own plan. And I see so many people make the mistake of going there for the wrong motivation of getting that first title and being the person. But do you enjoy the work that's gonna be there, and are you good at it? Are you good at it?
Yeah, you can also tell whether or not when people leave, and even if you're interviewing somebody, okay, so John True, if you're going to leave and go be the CRO at this company or director of sales, how many people would come with you? Right. And you've seen the guys that take the jobs and no one goes with them. And you're like, oh, that's a giant red flag.
No,
they haven't transformed anyone.
We'd be remiss if we didn't take the opportunity, Johnny. You've been out there I think you've been in the investment community. How long? Over 10 years, at least? How long have you been doing?
I think so. I think probably 10 years.
10 years. So, we got a lot of listeners, somebody with your kind of vantage point, like, what are you seeing out there that's really, really, is there any trends that you're seeing? Obviously, we've talked about human behaviors and cultures and great leaders. That's an awesome part of this podcast that we did. Anything you're seeing in industries, technologies that's catching your eye or a heads up you give the audience?
I don't have any major wisdom. A few things that have happened that I think at least have caused me to think differently about opportunities. And so we'll get to, I think, what our strength has been over time is how we think about opportunities, mostly pure play opportunities early that can grow really fast to reasonable scale on a primary value proposition. One of the things that's changed, I believe, is the evolution of private equity at many different layers in the software stack, and so the opportunities that are out there, and I'll give you a couple examples of specific opportunities, but there are ways to make money and really advance your career as a CRO in particular, and in private equity where there's a lot more meat on the bone. And quite honestly, there are oftentimes opportunities, I call them later stage revenue companies with very immature go-to-market execution. It happens all the time, especially in bootstrapped companies that have grown significantly, and it's possible. And there are a lot of folks doing it, and you can make a lot of money in those companies. But then private equity looks to acquire those firms, and they look for people that have seen great things, mostly in the world that we've been in, to now go in, and you've got a lot of more meat on the bone, right? So normally you have to you have to go through the stages of a company, what resources are available, what things to focus on. And in private equity, sometimes you can go into a later stage company and win that job where you couldn't necessarily win that job as a CRO in a really high flying, $50 million company that's growing 150% a year. Those are rare and unique. Folks get those jobs. But what I've learned in private equity is there are tons of opportunities that have tremendous impact and make money. I'll give you a couple examples. So one of the so first of all, a couple changes, I think evolutions that have happened is people are willing to put value on assets, software assets in particular, different than they used to. As an example, I would say it used to be a no-no that consulting companies who developed software products were great opportunities for anyone, and that the software products almost always wouldn't scale. And on the product side, it was a risky endeavor for a great product sales executive to go in there, and that has started to change actually, and it's because of the nature of how advanced software development has become, and products now can come out of those companies. And private equity looks for those to believe it or not, look for early to mid-stage software companies that have proven great scalability, and sometimes they'll get out of those software the services side of that business, but then they'll take those opportunities, and sometimes those TAMs or total available markets might look very different than what we look for in venture outsized returns. They might be more limited TAMs, but the private equity says, well, we can change that TAM over time through really productive M&A or adding development resources. But I see a lot more in merger acquisition, what would be considered buy and build opportunities. And I think there's a great opportunity for CROs in our world that don't even think about or go after those jobs, and they're super impactful. And those folks really look for people that have seen great in the past, because the companies oftentimes, I don't say most of the time, that's too big of a generalization, but these companies haven't seen what great looks like. They've succeeded in their own way, on their own, kind of on their own leadership style, and they just don't know what great looks like, especially from a sales and marketing execution standpoint. So I would say that's one trend it used to be the private equity, didn't work a lot in tech and software, and then they started working at software and tech at the very highest levels, like BMC when they took private equity money. But it's now come, really down, especially into the low to mid staged growth companies, because they're actively looking for places to put money to work, and they've proven they're great at selling those companies over time for great return and valuation that can mean great things for a CRO. So that's one area that I think has changed. And if you're not educated in that, you should study and learn all the different companies that are out there doing those things. I mean, in terms of earlier stage investing, and I'm probably not great at either one, and so I tend to lean on my skills as an investor really evaluating at the early stage people and their what I would consider their meaning the knowledge that they have. Do they have a unique understanding of a really interesting problem? And the TAM is not as important because I think as long as it's reasonably sized, it's going to change. They're going to pivot. They're going to evolve. So looking at the right people early is the most important thing for me. And then in terms of general trends and products, man, I'm not smart enough, but a couple of things I'm trying to understand is really, and people talk about AI, and I think anybody that has a company, whether it's big or small, that doesn't have a roadmap for where and how they might effectively use AI, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
I think most of the winners today in AI are in the incumbent software, the larger incumbent software companies that are adding functionality. And so early stage AI first companies, well, I think the market is trying to understand. I know I'm really trying to look for signs of what's going to happen at the application layer of AI first companies. And it's not clear to me what's going to win there. And there are a few things that continue to pop up there, and it's sustainable differentiation. And I think none of us know for sure, but we're all trying to see the future. And what companies have a value proposition that can't be significantly disintermediated as these huge foundation model companies continue to develop use cases over time. And then, you try to pattern match. I know I try to pattern match and say, what are they can only go after huge markets in these large foundation models. What are the pieces of markets that we can make a reasonable bet that they aren't going to go after in our lifetime or in the next 5 to 6 years? And it's no different for me in pattern matching, looking at, companies that fill gaps with ERP suites, for example, and figuring out, well, is the market big enough that the ERP folks are going to go after that market someday? Is it too small to build a company on? Or is it big enough to build a company on, but not big enough to get the attention, in this case, of the large language model? So I think that's number one. And number two, trying to understand, I don't want to overgeneralize, but, there have always been kind of system of records and workflow oriented enterprise software companies, I think, and where AI plays in there and what great applications in that area are going to look like in terms of, are they going to continue to have really deep and effective, unique workflows and attached to the AI? We don't know, because I can't think of too many companies that are really blowing and going. Most of the AI companies that are blowing and going right now, AI first, tend to be in the areas of development tools.
Yeah.
They're going fast and furious, and they're providing, unique. And there's still a question, by the way, of long-term unique differentiation there between the large language model companies and these companies. And some of them will get bought by those. Some of those will be disintermediated, and their value will be weakened over time, I believe. That's an opinion, just a strictly an opinion. So I tend to look at where some application-oriented companies are being successful in AI first are niche markets that have really deep understanding of unique problems and workflows. And so there are a couple companies in the legal space that are great examples. One's called Harvey, I think, that's growing really fast. And they're so deep in understanding of the real problems, both data and workflow within law firms, that they've created kind of a next generation of an enterprise app that solves those problems. And they've grown because it's so far away from what those large language models will probably do over time. But I don't think anyone would look at that company to say it's going to be $1 billion ARR company in the near term. But can they add new products and new features and broaden that skill set over time to continue to scale? I think is interesting. I'll be quiet for a second. That was way too long a diatribe for me to stick with. What do you guys think?
No, that was really good. I mean, I think to your point, it's really difficult to understand who's going to be disintermediated, when that's going to happen. And I think for an investor like you, determining the future value of a company you invest in is really difficult because of AI. Whereas normally before AI, you could say, okay, they just did 50 million, they're going to do 100. And then you extrapolate out in time and you kind of know what the value is going to be. And now it's really difficult to determine future value of the company because of AI.
And what I took away from what you were saying earlier about opportunities, like whether they be in private equity or VC, or even in having the same conversations with people that are trying to, do exactly what you said, is to get the AI into the workflows and get it really, really sticky. For me, this whole conversation we had today was this conversation of art and science. We started off with the art, or the human behavior of selling and leading. And the underlying truth of where we're landing here is that all of us are in a position that we're in today because we committed to the science and owned the science and learned the science so well that it allowed us to be free with our art and EQ and human behavior skills. And what you said, John, really rang true, is that opportunities arise for people to do just that. whether it be in AI companies, whether it be in private equity companies, whether it be in pivots from services to a software product. I think that, and that it's kind of an underlying theme of Revenue Builders Forever, is that like we're here because we built revenue on a connection between science and art. We committed to the science and did it so well that it allowed us to be free to add the human behavior aspect of EQ. So I like where this landed. No matter where you are, what audience you are, or what you're thinking about, if I could do one thing, I would really, really be great and excellent at, the science of company profiles, value propositions, differentiation, economic buyers, qualification, and then adding your own personal EQ to it of human behavior. Those are going, if you have that skill, no matter what happens with technology, you are going to be employable for a long, long time. That's my personal opinion.
There's a professional podcaster putting a bow and a through line on the entire.
Yeah, right. No kidding, huh? All right. With that.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much. And, thank you for a couple things. First of all, I think you know this, but many folks, I use your content oftentimes to try to be not right, but effective, because third parties helping to deliver great content to some of the CROs that I work with is way better than me trying to tell them my stories and what I have done. So part of that influence, you guys play a great role for me. I mean, I use it and I can pick and choose the messages and the context that I'm trying to get across. So you guys are giving back in ways that is very helpful for me. We didn't get to so much stuff today, so I just enjoy intellectual discussions like this. I could talk to you guys for 8 hours on all kinds of different topics and learn. And anytime I find places to learn, I want to come back. So thank you very much for the session.
John True, in that case, we're going to have you back. So thank you so much. Thanks, John True.
Talk soon. See you. Bye.
Thank you, John Kaplan. And thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.